What you need to know about networking in 2019, today on Live Now. Hello and welcome to Live Now, the info show for technology and trends. My name is Ben Friedman, and today we are lucky enough to be joined by none other than the networking nerd himself, Tom Hollingsworth. Tom, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation, Ben.
You're very welcome. Tom, I've known you for a little while now. You're one of the smartest guys I know in networking. You call yourself a networking nerd. What is a networking nerd?
Well, a networking nerd, quite simply, is a person who wants to know as much about networking as there is to know. You dive into the topic as deeply as possible, you learn everything that you can, and you get really good at doing this whole networking thing.
That's great. So have you always wanted to be a networking nerd, or how did you get into networking?
That's a fun story. Growing up, my parents got me a Commodore 64 computer, and I learned how to work a little bit of magic on that. As I grew up and went to school and went through college, computers is always kind of something I was very interested in, but I never really wanted to do networking until I kind of got out on my own and realized exactly how much of a computer technician's job involved working on the network. And so I decided, I might want to learn a little something about this. And so that's kind of when I dug in and said, I need to do what I have to do to get good at this.
Fantastic. So let me ask you, we're in 2019 here, we're just coming up on the first quarter here. You deal with a lot of companies. I know you work with a bunch of companies in your event management side of what you do, which we'll talk about in a moment. What do you consider to be the top 3 trends that people are talking about when it comes to networking in 2019?
Well, that's a good question, Ben. There are a lot of trends out there flying around, and I think the top 3 for me would have to be one, being able to connect your existing on-premises network infrastructure to the cloud. We're seeing a lot of companies that are starting to migrate all of their infrastructure to places like AWS or Azure or places, things online. And in order to do that, you have to have network connectivity. So how do you build those two things together? The second piece will be branch office connectivity. Now, how you define a branch is a huge task for your group. A branch could be something as simple as an office somewhere in Idaho, or it could be a store in a mall. And getting all of those things tied together for your data center workloads, as well as cloud connectivity, is a huge aspect of people's jobs. And the third biggest trend that I think we're seeing a lot of people focusing on now is networking visibility. We have all this data that's been sitting out here for years. It has a lot of great information that can tell us some secrets about the way that we use our networks. But in order to use it effectively, we have to be able to decode it. And a lot of people are building software platforms that can do that for us.
Very interesting. So you mentioned the cloud a couple of times there. And of course, cloud is one of these huge buzzwords for 2019. Everyone is talking about the cloud this, cloud that, and everything. Some people I've talked to have talked about this sort of transition to the cloud as being like the end of the IT manager, or everything's going to be in the cloud. There'll be nobody left in IT. Now, I'm not an IT guy myself, but is this just sky is falling, or what will the transition to the cloud mean for the IT departments at most companies?
Well, it's a fascinating question, Ben, and I think it's a little bit of the Chicken Little syndrome. The sky is falling a little bit. But mostly it's falling down on people who haven't really advanced their careers in the last, let's say 5 to 6 years. They got really comfortable doing a job. They didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the technology that was out there. And the next thing you know, their job is about to be subsumed by a shell script somewhere or some kind of automated process. And so the naysayers in the cloud right now are telling the world that you can't replicate these jobs, that people are going to lose them to automation. And the reality is that while we will lose some jobs, we also have to think about the possibility that a job that we could hold in 2 to 3 years may not exist today because we haven't invented it yet to work on the cloud. So I don't see IT managers and IT staff going away, but I do see the really important ones getting retrained on new job roles as quickly as possible.
Now, we were recently at Keith Parsons' Wireless LAN Professional conference and shooting live there. And there was a lot of buzz there about Wi-Fi 6, but also about 5G. And there were some people that were sort of the opinion that 5G might one day replace Wi-Fi, or that there could sort of be some sort of super convergence where really wired and Wi-Fi and 5G all become sort of different protocols under the same banner of sort of networking. How do you see that? Do you think they'll ever sort of come together like that, or should that even happen? What does the future hold for those three very distinct network protocols?
Well, that's a good question, because I don't necessarily see all three of those protocols converging yet, for the same reason that I don't see traditional semi-truck based shipping converging with minivans and sports cars anytime soon. They're all three very different purposes. So wired networking is something that's very important for devices that need to be powered, devices that need super low latency connections, or maybe in an area where wireless or cellular connectivity is impossible to do. Maybe it's a high security facility. So traditional wired networking, I don't think is going to go by the wayside anytime soon. Now, the end user side of things has rapidly been transitioning to using wireless, like Wi-Fi 5 and Wi-Fi 6, and also the next generation of what we would consider cellular technology, which is being labeled 5G right now, which is the successor to 4G LTE. Those would be the most likely protocols to merge down the road, but I don't necessarily see that happening, simply because wireless infrastructure as we know it today, things like Wi-Fi 6 is a good example, is a method for carriers to offload high congestion from their cellular band networks. So what you see from carriers like AT&T and Verizon is a huge rush to build these towers, to build out this infrastructure. And as more and more people start using it, you can only build so many towers. You can only cover so much spectrum. And so we've seen this a lot of times with technology, where they try to use something that's almost the same, but not quite, to offload a lot of that traffic. If you have an Apple iPhone and you've ever walked by a Starbucks and joined ATT Wi-Fi, you know that was one of the mechanisms that carriers were using to try to offload that traffic. I see that continuing in the future. Development may happen parallel between Wi-Fi 6 or whatever Wi-Fi 7 ends up being, and whatever 6G ends up being on the cell side, but I see them as two distinct technologies for different purposes down the road.
Yeah, I know one of the biggest problems with 5G they've talked about is that it requires so many more towers, because it's such a higher frequency. It requires so many more towers to provide the same coverage as 4G did. And it strikes me there are Wi-Fi access points anywhere, so everywhere. So if you were to talk about Wi-Fi 7 and 6G, maybe it would make sense to actually have the 6G radios co-located with the Wi-Fi access points.
I could definitely see that being something. We already have a very similar concept in DAS, which is in-building cellular architecture, but they still have to run on parallel tracks right now because they're different frequencies. But I could see down the road, perhaps the Wi-Fi Alliance wants to talk to the cellular coverage people that are making those radios, and they want to get on the same page so that they can offer an all-in-one box that has a multitude of different radios, probably something that maybe even is a software-defined radio, which is a fancy way of saying a radio that can be programmed to multiple different frequencies. And then perhaps you can have a 6G access point alongside a Wi-Fi 7 access point. They all kind of work in concert with each other to provide the best coverage for the user mix that you have in a specific location.
Cool. Well, when that idea comes to fruition, I hope they'll send me my royalties for coming up with that. So I think that's the best way to be. Let's shift gears just a little bit here. You're in you serve in a kind of a different capacity now. Your current project is with Gestalt IT and TechFieldDay. TechFieldDay is really unique. It's really unlike any other conference or symposium that I know about. Tell me about TechFieldDay. What is it, and what does it do?
Well, it's funny that you mention it's not unlike any conference you've ever seen before. And part of that reason is because TechFieldDay kind of wants to be the anti-conference. If you think about any conference that you've gone to in the last year, you probably think of lots of people, lots of conversations to be had, but not a lot of time to have them. TechFieldDay takes the opposite approach. We have a very small number of people attending. We have a smaller number of people that are presenting for a longer period of time to allow real in-depth conversation to happen. So when you think about deeply technical conversations that you've had with people kind of on a sidebar at a conference, that's what we want to capture. The small group setting, the ability to dive really deep into a topic. As a nerd, that kind of appeals to me. But also to have the ability to kind of have good feedback for people who are presenting. And if you've ever been in a conference session, you know that it's really hard to get the opinion of 200 people about how your presentation went.
Indeed. So how did you find the transition from managing IT networks to managing people? You're managing all these influencers and these bloggers. I am sure that must be like herding cats at some time. What's that like?
It can be a little bit difficult when you have a lot of people who are very headstrong and who are very outspoken in the same room together. And it was a little bit of a transition. Most of my job before involved a keyboard, and now a lot of my job involves soft skills. And we don't talk enough about soft skills in IT, being able to talk to managers, being able to talk to decision makers and influencers and get them to kind of understand your approach. And it was a little bit of a transition period, especially for someone who's a little more introverted like me. I had to learn to come out of my shell. And, you know, when people have to have a conversation, you sometimes have to kind of sit on the side and listen a little bit, but you also have to know when to step in and go, all right, this is great, but, you know, we all have to be on our next appointment. So let's get moving.
So last question, what is the craziest thing you've ever seen happen at a Tech Field Day? What's your funniest memory that you can think of?
Well, looking back on all of the things that have happened, I think the craziest thing that's ever happened at a Tech Field Day event had to be at Storage Field Day 3. One of our presenting companies was purchased the day before their presentation. And so we were sitting there around the table and looking at the news and said, well, wait a minute, that company is supposed to present in 12 hours. And so they flew the CEO of the company that purchased them out to our location to give a short little speech before their actual technical presentation to remind everyone, yes, we did buy them on purpose and there was a really good reason for it. And that worked out really well. But, you know, sometimes the world of technology moves so fast, you don't even know that something's about to happen until it just comes right down the wire at you.
Yeah, and I know that there have been several companies that have announced their acquisition or announced coming out of stealth mode at Tech Field Day. It's really become sort of the go-to place for boutique sort of announcements like that. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. And it really boils down to, as I said earlier, the anti-conference feel, where you have a group of people who are very knowledgeable and understand the industry quite well. If you want to announce that you have a brand new product that you'd like to talk about, or if you're announcing that you're purchasing a company to take you into a new line of business, these are the kinds of people that can give you the expert advice and feedback about where you should take that vision and run with it.
So that's Tech Field Day, techfieldday.com. And Tom, thank you so much for your time today. If people want to find out a bit more about you or get in touch with you or see what you do, where's the best place to send them?
Well, you can find me at my blog at networkingnerd.net. You can also find me where I write for my professional job at gestaltit.com. You can also find me at techfieldday.com. I have a lot of content in all those places, and it's probably the best place to read up about what I'm thinking about this week.
Fantastic. Tom, thanks so much for joining us today. That is all the time that we have for the show today. But if you enjoyed the show, I really hope you'll leave us a like and maybe click on the button down there to subscribe. And I hope we'll see you next time on the next Live Now.